Blitzer, it's 1 p.m. from around the world. Thanks very much for joining us. A set of bombshells rocking the White House. Just the past 24 hours, the president's son-in-law stripped from seeing America's top secrets as other countries look to exploit him. The president's communications director admitting to Congress, meanwhile, that she tells, quote, white lies for the president. Plus, the president's former campaign chairman in court facing new charges, and the president himself and his business dealings before the campaign now under new scrutiny by the special counsel Robert Mueller. On top of all of this, corporate America doing what Congress won't, at least not yet, as students in Parkland, Florida, return to school for the first time since a shooting massacre. A major retailer, Dick's Sporting Goods, making big changes involving the weapons it sells. All that coming up, but first, the truly explosive revelations rocking the White House right now, raising new questions about the Russia probe and a key Trump advisor's role in the West Wing. Here's a look at some of the extraordinary developments over the past 24 hours. Sources tell CNN special counsel Robert Mueller is looking into President Trump's business dealings in Russia prior to the 2016 presidential campaign. Also, the Washington Post reports that Jared Kushner was targeted by other nations for manipulation. Kushner has been stripped of his top secret security clearance. White House Communications Director Hope Hicks, at the same time, admitting that she tells white lies, her words, white lies for the president. And former campaign chairman Paul Manafort pleading not guilty to new charges against him today. Let's begin with the breaking news and the tensions between Jared Kushner and the White House Chief of Staff John Kelly. First, listen to what President Trump said just days ago about General Kelly and Jared Kushner's security clearance.
General Kelly respects Jared a lot, and General Kelly will make that call. I won't make that call. I will let the general, who's right here, make that call. But Jared's doing some very important things for our country. I will let General Kelly make that decision, and he's going to do what's right for the country, and I have no doubt he'll make the right decision.
Let's bring in our senior White House correspondent, Jeff Zeleny. He's joining us with breaking developments. So, Jeff, what have you learned?
Well, if we do know that the existing battle lines that have long existed in the West Wing have been entrenched by this decision from the Chief of Staff to essentially strip the senior advisor, Jared Kushner, of his security clearance. But I'm told the reality is more complicated there. We're doing some new reporting, and we have a new story now on CNN.com that is saying that Jared Kushner, of course, first and foremost, he remains the president's son-in-law. And we were told again and again that is something to keep in mind here. The president, as we know, believes he is doing a good job. The question is, can he do his job in the same way? The answer probably is no. But the reality is the Middle East peace process is not on the verge of happening. So there's nothing necessarily that's going to stop anything urgently. Jared Kushner has known about this since Friday. Not everyone in the White House knew about this. Of course, it seemed like a bombshell yesterday afternoon, but he has gotten used to this idea. One of the reasons I'm told he was up on Capitol Hill working on his domestic agenda. He does not want to seem like he is being shoved aside. Someone who is a friend and supporter of his this morning told me that, look, he does not want to prove his critics are right by leaving, so do not look for Jared Kushner to leave at all. A bigger question is, how does this relationship develop between the Chief of Staff and Jared Kushner? We don't know the answer to it, but the president, we are told, does not like the view of all this on television, that his son-in-law looks like he's hanging out there. Jared Kushner feels like he's being picked on in some respect. So this is going to be one more, chapter in this ongoing story about the White House Chief of Staff. Right now, it looks like he is secure, but of course, these are sometimes minute-by-minute, day-by-day situations. But for now, at least, Jared Kushner did not ask for special permission to have the president review this. But again, keep in mind, yes, he's a senior advisor, but he's the son-in-law. He's at dinner tables, lunch tables. He stands above almost anyone else in the West Wing except Ivanka Trump, perhaps, who also is stripped of her interim clearance. So this is a developing story, to say the least.
And the tension between General Kelly, the White House Chief of Staff, and Jared Kushner, we've seen a lot of reports that the tension is very, very significant, and the president thinks all these reports about Jared Kushner have been totally unfair.
Right. I mean, the president believes that Jared Kushner is doing a good job. We saw him say that at that press conference on Friday, but he also is delegating his chief of staff to do this. So at some point, will the president have to make a choice between his chief of staff and his son-in-law? If so, I think the The bloodlines will be much stronger, the family lines there. But as of now, the president has not indicated that he wants to make that choice. But watch for that relationship to develop. A lot of people, have thought that John Kelly was out a number of times. He still remains, and he has the president's support. We've seen this president as someone who can, be just fine with feuding and fighting. Look what he's doing to his attorney general here. So this is something that, again, we'll see how it shakes out. But Jared Kushner, he wants to get back to work. He is working. The question is, will he be able to, be in the Situation Room, other things for those private meetings? Probably not.
Yeah, we have a lot more on the latest humiliation by the president of his attorney general, Jeff Sessions. That's coming up in a little while. It's pretty extraordinary what's going on in that. It's also extraordinary what's going on in the West Wing of the White House. Jeff Zeleny, stand by. There's more news we're getting to get a better understanding as to what this downgraded security clearance means for Jared Kushner and his work in the White House. I want to bring in our military and diplomatic analyst, retired Rear Admiral John Kirby. You've had a top secret security clearance over at the State Department, at the Pentagon. Walk us through the difference between what Kushner had, an interim top secret SCI, secure compartmented information security clearance, as opposed to what he has now, an interim secret security clearance.
Sure thing, Wolf. And it's important to remember that there are 3 levels of security clearance in the U.S. government: confidential, secret, and top secret. What we're going to do is kind of break down the differences between top secret and secret. It's also important to also remember that it's not just your clearance that matters, whether you get access to information and material. It's whether there's a need to know, whether you actually have to have it to do your job. So with that, let's take a look. Top secret's the highest level of clearance, most sensitive information. If it's disclosed, it could cause exceptionally grave damage to national security. That's the 2 big elements right there. Next. It's the most rigid storage and handling and access protocols. So if you're going to have access to top secret, that kind of material is really going to be carefully safeguarded from the time it's created to the time it's destroyed. And the clearance must be reinvestigated every single 5 years. Again, owing to the highest sensitivity of that information, Wolf. On the secret side, this is information that, if it's disclosed, could cause serious damage to national security, as opposed to top secret, which exceptionally grave damage to national security. There's going to be less detailed information with respect to secret material. It's not going to go into the sources and methods. It's not really going to lay out where all this information comes from and the context behind it. You're not going to have access to the president's full daily briefing. And I use the word full deliberately, Wolf, because there's going to be articles and material in the presidential daily briefing that will be at the secret level that Mr. Kushner would be able to see. But he's not going to be able to see all of it. And that clearance is going to be reinvestigated now every 10 years. Again, because the material under a security clearance isn't quite as sensitive as it is under the top secret.
All right, good explanation, John Kirby. Thanks very much for that. Let's get some more analysis on all of these extraordinary developments. Joining us now, CNN legal analyst, former federal prosecutor Michael Zeldin, and CNN chief political analyst Gloria Borger. You look at all the tumult that's going on right now about Jared Kushner's security clearances. Is it worth it right now? What does he bring to the table as far as national security, Middle East diplomacy, other sensitive issues that would allow him, in the face of this assault, to continue?
Well, I think that's up to the president. Honestly, it's a decision the president has to make. I think it's very clear that Jared and Ivanka would not want to leave town right now, because it would look like that they were under assault and were leaving under assault. He is involved in criminal justice reform, so he could clearly continue to do that. I spoke with someone at the White House last night who pushed back on me very hard and said, he can continue doing exactly the job that he was doing, but this White House advisor seems to be the only one who was saying that, to be honest, that if he's going to be very involved in Mideast peace, he has to be allowed to see classified information that talks about sources and methods, perhaps satellite photographs, et cetera, has to be in the sit room at moments. And I think it's really trying to do your job with a blindfold on.
Here's the problem, though, Michael Zeldin, that let's say he's involved in sensitive diplomatic missions for the president, whether the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, which doesn't seem to be moving very fast, at least not now. But let's say he has to go to Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates, or let's say he goes to China. He's developed a relationship with Chinese leadership, or to Mexico. He's developed a relationship with them. He's going to have deputies who are there who have top secret SCI security clearances. He only has secret security clearances. What if they, say something that is top secret in his presence, that potentially could be awkward.
To say the least, it could be awkward, and it's really untenable. And I think, personally, that the president is going to do a waiver. I just don't think it's acceptable to the president to have his chief, sort of guy, Kushner, so handcuffed as you and Gloria have properly described it. He has that authority on an issue-by-issue, event-by-event, person-by-person basis to waive. And so I think if he's, to take your hypothetical, he goes to Saudi Arabia, the president says, in Saudi Arabia, he's got top secret. But it doesn't really help the briefing process. You really need to be briefed before you go into these meetings, and that briefing wants you to be as informed as the person you're going to be, your counterparty is going to be. So I just don't see how it works unless there's a waiver of some sort.
Gloria, the Washington Post had a major story saying that at least 4 countries, they named China, Israel, Mexico, and the United Arab Emirates, have privately discussed ways to manipulate Jared Kushner because of leverage they may have to their advantage over him. This is an extremely serious potential matter.
Well, it is a serious matter, and these stories, we've done them, the Post has done them, about questions about Jared's conversations, potentially mixing his business with his work during the transition, are probably a large part of the reason that he has not been able to secure the security clearance that he wants. I mean, we don't know whether this information came from intercepts of these conversations. We also know that diplomats tend to brag to each other about how much influence they have over high-ranking people in the United States government. And we know that that occurred with Michael Flynn, for example, where Russians were bragging about their relationship with Flynn. But again, you have to put 1 and 1 together and come up with 2 here. And you have to say, look, here's this person who has never been in government before, who considered himself the person to be the back channel during the transition to Russia and other countries. And suddenly now he is unable to get his security clearance, or not suddenly, it's taken a year. He's not able to get his security clearance. Why is that? And the Post story is a very good example of it.
Michael, last week CNN exclusively reported that the special counsel Robert Mueller's interest in Kushner had expanded to include what are described as non-Russian foreign investors, in, for example, China, right there. Do you think those attempts to seek leverage over him, these reported attempts, played a role in the decision not to grant him top secret security clearances?
It sure would seem so, because one of the issues in issuing a top secret clearance is, are you vulnerable? Can you be leveraged? Can you be blackmailed? Can you be financially compromised? And all of the reporting that Gloria has been doing on Anbank, the Chinese insurance company, and VEB Bank, the Russian bank, all of these meetings occurring while we know, at least has been reported, that one of Kushner's marquee properties, 666 Fifth Avenue, is $1 billion point something in debt, and it's coming due quickly, and that if they don't get that money from a foreign investor, something terrible could happen to that building. So you have this confluence of public role and private interests, and that, I think, is going to hold up anything that relates to top secret, because he's too vulnerable.
Yeah, it's a major problem for the White House right now. Guys, stand by. There are other developments unfolding as we stand. Investigators for the special counsel, Robert Mueller, have been asking a lot of questions about those earlier business dealings. Questions include the timing of Trump's decision to run for president and any possibly compromising information Russia may have had about him. Reporter Kara Scannell is joining us now with more. Kara, walk us through the timeline of events that Mueller's team is looking into right now.
That's right, Wolf. Sources we're talking to tell us there are several areas of interest to the special counsel when it comes to Trump's business dealings in Russia before he launched his presidential bid. There are some key dates that are important to Mueller. First, November 9th, 2013. That's when Trump hosted the Miss Universe pageant in Moscow. He made significant money from the event and met with Russian oligarchs. It's also when he began discussing plans to brand Trump Tower Moscow. Now, just 2 days later, Trump announces it's a done deal. He tweets, "Trump Tower Moscow is next." next. But the deal fell apart relatively quickly, and Trump Tower Moscow was never built. Sources tell us Mueller has been asking witnesses about his meetings with people during that trip and exploring whether it's possible Russians have compromising information on Trump. One source said investigators appeared interested around the timing of when Trump decided to run and how that coincided with his business talks. Now, the next year, in 2014, that's the year one source told Mueller Trump got, quote, serious about running for president. Fast forward to 2015. Trump makes a second run at trying to brand a Trump Tower Moscow. Trump had his attorney Michael Cohen begin negotiations with some different Russian backers. Trump even signed a non-binding letter of intent in October of that year. This is after he launched his campaign. He was running for president while he was trying to push this deal through. But then 3 months later, just before the Iowa caucuses, the negotiations for Trump Tower Moscow fell apart and the project never got off the ground. Now, at no point during his campaign did Trump ever reveal he was negotiating with Russians to expand his business there. All of these points along this timeline are great interest to Mueller, according to our sources, as he's been asking different witnesses specific questions about all of this. Wolf?
Very intriguing indeed. Art, Kara, thank you very much. Kara Scannell reporting as the Russia probe takes a direct aim at the president's inner circle. A pivotal moment could be at hand. Listen to what the president said just a few months ago in this exchange with two New York Times reporters.
Mueller was looking at your finances, your family's finances, unrelated to Russia. Is that a red line?
Would that be a breach of what his actual...
I would say yes. Yeah, I would say yes.
I would say yes. The president said it would be a breach of that so-called red line. Let's discuss this and more. Once again, Michael Zeldin is with us. He's Robert Mueller's former special assistant at the Department of Justice and our chief political analyst, Gloria Borger. So has this red line been crossed now that Mueller and his investigators are asking various witnesses about Donald Trump's business dealings with Russia long before the campaign?
No, I don't think so. I think Mike Schmidt's question was unrelated to Russia. This is related very much to Russia. And I think in asking these questions, you know, our sources say, look, we don't know why Mueller is asking these questions. Was he just trying to check a box and go through a timeline regarding Donald Trump and his businesses? Or is he looking for ways that the Russians had potential leverage over Donald Trump and his business associates and his business over the past years? So I would say that this is a completely legitimate area of inquiry. I know that Kenneth Starr, former special counsel for Bill Clinton, says that it is not. But I believe that we have seen from Bob Mueller, the 13 indictments against the Russians, that he is pursuing all things Russia, and this is a part of it.
Listen to what Ken Starr, Michael, said on CNN's New Day earlier this morning. Listen to this.
I think it's beyond his mandate. The mandate is what happened during the 2016 election in terms of collusion. That's the key idea.
That's not accurate, is it?
No. There's a multi-part mandate. And point one of it is to continue the counterintelligence investigation that Comey testified was underway in March. So front and center in Mueller's investigation is the counterintelligence aspect of it. And I think this, what Gloria, you were just speaking about, relates exactly to that. Was there an effort by the Russians to compromise Trump and similarly Kushner or anybody else, Flynn, Cohen, all of those people, in an effort to have leverage on them should Trump become president of the United States? This is exactly in his mandate, which is exactly about counterintelligence. Now, to Ken Starr's point, there is a secondary part, which is, was there a collusive relationship? Were the Russians trying to do something to be, sort of counterintelligence wise? And were any Americans trying to cooperate with them? So that's the second part, but first and foremost is a counterintelligence.
I was surprised to hear Ken Starr's answer that the mandate is what happened during the 2016 elections in terms of collusion. He clearly didn't read the mandate that Robert Mueller got when he was named by Rod Rosenstein, the acting attorney general. The first part was any links or coordination between the Russian government and individuals associated with the campaign of President Donald Trump. That is correct.
Right.
Part two, quote, any matters that arose or may arise directly from the investigation. Part 3, any other matters within the scope of 28, then he goes through another matter. The same reason why Mueller is going after Paul Manafort, for example, on things that he allegedly did long before the campaign, opens up the president to the same kind of inquiry.
Exactly right. So Gloria's, I think, dead on when she says that these inquiries that relate to whether the president could be compromised fits squarely within the mandate. As to the Manafort indictment, it's not as closely tethered, but if it creates an understanding of what the Russians were doing, and or if it creates an understanding of whether there was a collusive relationship, it falls within the mandate. And we know from Rosenstein's testimony that he and Mueller talk, and Mueller brings things to him and says, what do you want me to do about this? And Rosenstein gives an answer. So, for example, the Eastern District of Virginia cases, which are tax cases against Manafort, Mueller had to have gone to Rosenstein and said, what do you want me to do?
Earlier, the president tweeted this. Why is Attorney General Jeff Sessions asking the Inspector General to investigate potentially massive FISA abuse? Will take forever, has no prosecutorial power, and already late with reports on Comey, etc. Isn't the IG, the Attorney General, an Obama guy? Why not use Justice Department lawyers? Disgraceful, close quote. Let's go to our Justice reporter, Laura Jarrett. She's over at the Justice Department for us. I take it you're now getting some response from officials there, including a statement from the Attorney General himself.
Yes, Wolf, a rare statement from the Attorney General after months of tweets and public humiliations and dressing downs. The Attorney General is now breaking his silence and firing back against the president. And I want to read you the statement that we just received from him in full, Wolf. He says, we have initiated the appropriate process that will ensure complaints against this department will be fully and fairly acted upon if necessary. And what he means there, of course, is the referral to the Inspector General's office here at the Justice Department on the so-called FISA abuses situation from the Nunes memo, if you will. But then he goes on, Wolf, and this is really important. He says, as long as I am the Attorney General, I will continue to discharge my duties with integrity and honor, and this department will continue to do its work in a fair and impartial manner according to the law and the Constitution. So, Wolf, I can't convey enough to you how rare this is after months. You remember the tweet storm back in July when the president was going off every minute on the Attorney General. He never said a word, and today is the first time he has broken his silence, Wolf. And when asked, I talked to a close source to the Attorney General about what was the difference today? Why today would he break his silence? I was told it was because the president went after DOJ attorneys. And for him, that was something of a red line. And he felt like the president was just too in the weeds, weighing in on how DOJ attorneys, according to the president, should be prosecuted for FISA abuses. And for the Attorney General, enough was enough, Wolf.
He went after the Inspector General of the Department of Justice, Michael Horowitz, who was named back Attorney General by President Obama, but earlier to other senior positions was named to those positions by President Bush. He's a career specialist in this area. Laura, thanks very much. There's a lot of anger, Gloria, at the Department of Justice. This public humiliation by the President of the Attorney General of the United States, not the first time, but by name, and then ending that tweet in all caps, disgraceful. It's extraordinary.
Well, it's not only against the Attorney General, it's against the Department of Justice. And I can only imagine what Laura is saying is something that made Sessions finally decide that he had to respond. And by the way, the Inspector General, who was approved unanimously by the United States Senate, who worked for both Republicans and Democrats, is also someone who routinely makes criminal referrals. So if he finds criminal misconduct, wrongdoing, then he can refer it. So, let him do his work.
Yeah, that's exactly what his job is, Gloria.
The Inspector General.
The Inspector General, he receives these sort of complaints. He undertakes an exhaustive examination and makes a finding. If, as Gloria says, it requires criminal involvement, then it's referred to the criminal division for prosecution. If it involves ethical, it goes to the Office of Professional Responsibility, and they take care of it. That's what he's there for. And I think this is what put Sessions over the edge. The tipping point was to attack a career prosecutor who's doing his job earnestly, to say that it was a disgrace that this is the way it was being handled was just too much for Jeff Sessions, and good for him for protecting the people of the Justice Department. I think he's got to get a lot of hand clapping in the Justice by people sitting at their desks when they hear what he said.
A lot of folks, Gloria, as you know, they think the president would like Sessions to resign, to quit, so that he could bring in someone else who would be more acceptable to him. He hated the fact that Sessions recused himself from the Russia probe, and as a result was unable to protect the president.
Right. I mean, look, you know, we've been talking about this since the summer. When will Sessions leave? The president doesn't like him. His anger is still there about Sessions recusing himself and not telling him in advance that he intended to recuse himself from the Russia investigation. I think there are a lot of people internally who are advising the president that he shouldn't fire anybody right now, that right now is an important point in the Mueller investigation, and the president should not be doing anything with his attorney general. But we'll have to see where this plays out, because the attorney general is responding to the president saying, no, you don't. No, you don't. I'm sorry. You don't get to do this to my Justice Department. And we'll have to see. What happens next. I think the ball is in the president's court right now.
It is a pretty serious humiliation by the president of the Attorney General of the United States and others at the Department of Justice. The president is making these statements and these tweets. These are official presidential statements calling all of this disgraceful. It's pretty.
We saw him do the same thing with McCabe, sort of creating a hostile work environment so that McCabe retires early, and maybe that's what he's hoping for.
Former FBI director.
Former FBI director.
Deputy FBI director.
Yes, exactly. And maybe this is what he's trying to do. If he can't fire him, maybe he can humiliate him out of his job. But Jeff Sessions has said today, I work for the Department of Justice. I have to protect the integrity of the Department of Justice. There are clear rules, Mr. President, about communications between the White House and the Justice Department. You've overstepped that boundary again, and enough's enough.
All right, guys, thanks very, very much. Coming up, the survivors of the Parkland, Florida shooting make an emotional return to school today. I'll talk to one of the students about his first day back and how he's keeping the memories of his classmates so close. Plus, taking a stand, the nation's largest sporting goods retailer announcing it will stop selling students and 3 adults. The building where the shooting took place remains closed and will likely be torn down. Joining us now, Alfonso Calderon. He's a junior at the high school. When I spoke with him last week, when I spoke to you last week, Alfonso, you said it was going to be really physically, emotionally difficult to return to school, but you thought you would. I assume you were in school today. How did it go?
I just want to start with, it's difficult. A lot of people sometimes take for granted how hard it is to go back to a place that reminds you of something so tragic, but at the same time, it was actually very uplifting, because it was amazing to see how the community and all the students in the school got together. There were so many hugs and so much time just bonding with people and teachers and, you know, rebuilding those bridges that were once burnt. It was amazing, but at times very emotional for me.
Did most of the students go back today? Some decided apparently not to, right?
Absolutely. I would say most of the student body was there, and as I said before, it was just an amazing spectacle to see, because I saw teachers and students who used to get into arguments on a daily basis hug and cry in each other's arms. I saw people who wouldn't dare speak to each other just open up, and it's really heartwarming.
And now it's going to be regular days as of tomorrow, all of next week. Everybody's going to be going back to school. What was it like going in? There was a lot of armed presence there, a lot of police, right?
Yeah, I think some students might have found it comforting, but personally, I felt as if when I was there, I felt like I was choking, like if I was having an asthma attack. It was very difficult to grapple with everything, you know, especially with the freshman building, which is where the tragedy happened. There's a fence built around it, and there's armed officers at all times, including through the night now. And walking through there to get to some of my classes, it was tough.
Is that going to stay like that as far as you know? Are you going to have to endure that kind of police presence for the rest of the semester?
Absolutely. I'm sure that most of the police officers that were here today will be gone by next week, and the ones in school as well, but The ones around the building where it happened, those aren't going anywhere. That's still an active crime scene until the case has been settled. So I think it'll forever be locked down.
Yeah, it's an awful situation all around. I know it's painful and difficult for you and all of your friends at school. Let me get your reaction to what's happened with Dick's Sporting Goods, a major retailer business that actually sold the Florida shooter a shotgun last year at the age of only 18. They say they will stop selling AR-15 style rifles. The CEO of the store of the company also says the decision was made for the kids of Stoneman Douglas, and you're going to have to be 21 from now on to purchase any kind of weapon there. What's your reaction?
I know I just talked about some very depressing issues, but I want to say that is the most uplifting news I have heard in a while. It's been very tough going to my state capital in Tallahassee and being told that I won't be able to do anything, or the Hill in Washington, D.C., and facing some trouble. But I'm glad to see that companies are finally hearing not only the children's outcry, but everybody in this country who is sick and tired of the dysfunctional laws and system that we have set in place. I'm glad that Dick's Sporting Goods supports common sense gun laws, such as an 18-year-old should not be able to buy a shotgun or an AR-15. That's just not sensible. And I'm glad that companies, which are what will stop the NRA from doing what they're doing, and basically killing kids, the companies are going to be the ones that are going to stop this. And I'm calling out every single company right now who is not in favor of cutting their ties with the NRA. The NRA has shown themselves to be toxic, vile, and to not support the right to live, which is in the preamble of the Constitution. I want them to remember, they always talk about the Second Amendment, but that preamble is before it because of its importance and its necessity for America to be the way it is.
Alfonso Calderon is a junior at the Stoneman Douglas High School. Today was the first day back at school. Alfonso will continue these conversations. Agents of change while students are going back to Stoneman Douglas High School. The Florida legislature is debating gun control over at the state capitol in Tallahassee. An amendment to start a debate on banning assault-type weapons was defeated, while a measure to arm teachers was approved by committee. Joining us now from the state capitol of Tallahassee is Matt Caldwell. He's a Republican member of the Florida State House. Representative, thanks so much for joining us.
Absolutely, Wolf. Appreciate the opportunity.
Let me get your reaction to what we just heard from that student at the high school, a junior, Alfonso Calderon. He's very angry at the state legislature, at the U.S. Congress, very angry at the National Rifle Association. He says they're not doing anything substantive. What's your reaction?
Well, I just don't think that's true. We're seriously considering new measures for school safety, programs that are going to involve the sheriff in the local communities being directly involved in protecting these schools. We're looking at additional resources on mental health funding, and I frankly think it's way past time. We shouldn't have had to wait this long on mental health issues. I've supported things back in my district for years now, but this is an appropriate response in that regard. Now, in terms of some of the other proposals, they violate the Second Amendment, and at the end of the day, you're not going to have legislators, at least not legislators like myself, who are willing to cross that line. That's just totally inappropriate. I no more am going to violate the Second Amendment than I'm going to violate somebody's First Amendment rights. They're equally valuable, and they really are the bedrock of our country, Wolf.
But
Absolutely.
You know that even the First Amendment, freedom of speech, there are restrictions. There are problems that you can't cry. You go into a crowded theater and you can't scream out fire. That would be a violation of the First Amendment because it endangers people. So there are restraints, and even the Supreme Court has said there are restraints on the Second Amendment, which gives the right to bear arms in the United States. So are you willing to accept any restraints?
Well, listen, absolutely, Wolf. There's restraints. You know, children don't have the same access to civil rights that adults do. That's why child pornography is illegal, but the Supreme Court have said adults are free to use that in their First Amendment expression. That's a big part, actually, of what we're talking about right now, is the discussion of whether or not 18, 19, and 20-year-olds ought to be able to purchase a firearm. That's a good, big, contentious part of the bill. It's something I'm certainly pondering on and trying to figure out if that's really appropriate. I mean, the honest truth is you've got 20 million Floridians, so if we raise the age to buy a firearm, even something as simple as a hunting shotgun or a hunting rifle, you're talking about 600,000 Floridians who will have fewer civil rights. the next day. And that's something that really gives me pause, and I'm struggling with in terms of how we move forward on those kind of proposals.
Your Republican governor of Florida, Rick Scott, says one common sense change is, in fact, to raise the age limit to 21 to purchase any firearm. Are you with the governor on that?
Again, that's really going to be difficult for me to get there. I need to see how that's going to make a difference. When you look at the different types of school shootings we have all across this nation, and each one of them is a tragedy, it really was spectacular to have the students come up here and visit and share their personal experiences one-on-one with me last week, and I do appreciate that. And some of the ideas they brought us are things that you're going to see us move forward on. On this one, again, what is it going to really change? How is that going to affect the outcome? You look at the tragedy that happened in Sandy Hook. It didn't matter what the age restriction would have been. In that instance, that maniac killed his mother and stole all of her weapons. We really need to focus on mental health. We need to focus on making the schools more secure, and we need to treat these individuals like they are. They're lone wolf terrorists. They're people that sit and they plot and they plan. They take 6 months a year to lay out a strategy, to look at the building, to evaluate how they're going to attack their peers and people they know. Their inspiration may not be religious, but it's definitely terrorism in terms of how they go out and they conduct these activities. And that's really where I think our focus has to be.
There are a lot of steps under consideration, including raising the age limit. But very quickly, Dick's Sporting Goods, a major retailer, are now announcing that they're going to ban the sale of all firearms to anyone under the age of 21. They also will no longer sell these assault-style weapons like an AR-15 style weapon. Here's what the company's CEO told Chris Cuomo on New Day earlier today on CNN.
But when you look at those kids and their parents and the grief that everyone's going through, and we don't want to be a part of this story any longer. We actually sold the shooter a shotgun in November of last year. And we looked at that and found out that we did this. We had a pit in our stomach and said, we don't want to be a part of this story, and we need a responsibility to these kids.
You support the freedom that this chain, this Dick's Sporting Goods store, has to make a decision like that?
Yeah, look, Wolf, I totally agree with the Supreme Court's decision in the Citizens United case. Corporations have the opportunity for free speech. If they don't want to sell a gun, if they want to take a position in the public space that is a strongly held belief of theirs, they have every right to do that. And by the way, I think that should extend to everybody. And so you'll see me disagreeing in these cases where we force people to participate in activities that they don't agree with. I think those First Amendment rights extend to not just to citizens, but the corporations that are made up of all of our citizens. And so, that's for Dick's Sporting Goods to decide, and I certainly respect their decision in that regard.
Representative Matt Caldwell, thanks so much for joining us.
Absolutely.
With the string of bombshells hitting the White House, which is facing not just one, not two, but a half dozen controversies rocking the Trump inner circle. Here is the rundown of all of them. CNN learning that special counsel Robert Mueller is looking at the president's business dealings in Russia before the campaign. The president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, losing his top-secret security clearance. And a bombshell Washington Post report saying officials from at least 4 countries discuss ways to target Kushner, looking at his financial woes and his inexperience. Former Trump campaign chief Paul Manafort pleading not guilty to new charges. White House Communications Director Hope Hicks admitting to a House committee that she has told white lies. And the president's latest slam on his attorney general, calling Jeff Sessions' actions on surveillance warrants, quote, disgraceful. Sessions did just respond. We're going to get into all of this. But first to the breaking news involving the growing tensions between Jared Kushner and Chief of Staff John Kelly. We have CNN senior White House correspondent Jeff Zeleny joining us with this. Are these battle lines deepening between Kushner and Kelly?
Well, Brianna, it certainly seems like they are. And, of course, they've been sort of lying in wait, if you will, a bit dormant over the last couple weeks or so. But they are again showing themselves because John Kelly, of course, followed the president's directive and stripped Jared Kushner of his top secret security clearance. Now, this is something that has, has inflamed tensions, but it's something that Jared Kushner has known about since Friday. He didn't, talk about it, of course, but he was on Capitol Hill yesterday working on his domestic agenda on sentencing reform, prison reform. That's an example. An aide said he's going to keep doing his job keep doing something. But the question is his job going to remain the same? And it almost certainly isn't, because he does not have access to the same intelligence information. But we're talking to a variety of people, and someone who's close to him said that he believes everyone is out to get him at this point inside the White House. So he's, upset, concerned, but does not want to prove his critics right by leaving. So he's going to stay. The question is, at what point will these attentions sort of boil over with the chief of staff? But again, he is focusing on the matter at hand. But important to remember, he may not have that top secret security clearance, but he's the president's son-in-law through and through. And that perhaps is the most weighty title of all here. So it's not like he's some advisor who's operating without an entire portfolio. He has the family portfolio, which is very significant.
And I want to bring in our panel to discuss all of this. We have Shannon Pettypiece with us, White House reporter for Bloomberg News, David Sanger, CNN political and national security analyst, who's also the national security correspondent at the New York Times, and our very own Abby Phillip with us as well. And I do, Jeff, want to ask you about this because we just learned this. The White House briefing has been canceled. We were expecting this to be happening right now. It was going to be something we would discuss. What's going on with that?
Well, I think one of the reasons, at least the official reason, is the White House says that they want the press and the public to focus on guns today. There's an event in the next hour where the president's having lawmakers in. I think probably more of the real reason is they don't want to answer questions about the security clearance. It's something we've seen again and again, day after day, that it's something that they don't want to talk about. There are no answers from yesterday, so they're trying to not distract their message, so they canceled the briefing.
Do you all remember a time where a briefing has been canceled like this on such little notice?
I can't remember. Not on this short notice, and I think it says something about where they're at, that they're saying, hey, let's talk about gun issues, which were kind of the third rail of, Republican and Democratic politics. That was not an area anyone wanted to go, let's say, in January. Right. Oh, let's focus on guns instead of everything over here. It's not like they canceled it so they could focus on an infrastructure meeting they had or something.
And we know that the White House has been willing to have briefings even when the president is speaking. There was one point when Sarah Huckabee Sanders was in the briefing room giving a briefing while the president was speaking in another room. So this is definitely something that they could have done today if they wanted to, but clearly they don't, to Jeff's point, they don't have anything more to give us. And there's all of this swirling about not just what Jared Kushner's status is, but also about what his actual duties are. What is his job description right now, and where does that stand at this point in time given his clearance issues?
Well, I think that the core element is yesterday they said they just didn't want to discuss security clearances, who's got them and how. And you might be able to get away with that for a little while. But the issue is exactly the one that Abby has talked about. He had two major foreign portfolios to think about. One is Mideast peace, and the second was supposed to be China competitiveness, all the China-related issues. Both of those are areas in which it's really hard to understand how you can sit in a meeting, absorb the data, if you don't have a top secret or in some cases compartmentalized clearance. The Israelis, when they send something over, never send it across at merely the secret level. Whether it's worth it or not, they always do top secret or higher. Almost anything that deals with China and North Korea, or the president's strategy with China is probably, and certainly this week on Xi Jinping's decision to go extend his own term beyond to perhaps indefinite rule. Those would all be highly classified matters.
It's hard to understand, David, how Jared Kushner will do his job without that information. I mean, once you dig into clearances and what different clearance levels mean, and you explain that to lay people who are not familiar, what you realize is actually for something that is secret, if you have secret clearance, there's a lot of that information you can just get from reading the newspaper. A lot of the things that people read day in, day out in reports may technically be classified. Some people will say that's because a lot of information is over-classified when it comes to what is in the government. But how is he, one, supposed to do his job without that information? And also, do you actually see the president abiding by this, considering, I mean, I think back to when he was in the Oval Office with the Russians and he disclosed classified information to them, highly sensitive information. He doesn't show really respect for these different dividing lines when it comes to properly disclosing information.
Well, Brianna, there is an easy way around this. which is the president can designate anybody they want on earth to receive classified information. I've even seen cases where, in very select cases, they've wanted reporters to receive classified information, usually when the White House is making an argument in favor of not disclosing something, trying to convince us not to publish something. So he could simply step in and designate that Jared Kushner can receive information